What's up, everybody? I'm John Middlekauff. You know what I need you to do. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got content for days reacting to every NFL game all the time, every single day. Subscribe, like the videos. Let's go. What is going on, everybody? How are we doing? Hopefully you had a great weekend. Recording this on Sunday night, just watching a little NCAA tournament. Not gonna lie, the dominance of SEC hoops. Every time I see these schools, like, kind of gives me the juice. I kind of miss football. Congrats to John Calipari, who I don't think had advanced past the second game since 2018. Couldn't win at Kentucky in recent memory. Goes to Arkansas. Boom. First year Sweet 16. Another program just makes me think of like Arkansas playing LSU. Just makes me think football. But the NCAA tournament, it's a lot of fun. And so is football. And that's what we're here to talk about because we had some things happen in the football world over the last couple days that I wanted to dive into. There was a quarterback signing that I think kind of signals some dominoes that lead us into the draft. I saw a tweet by a friend of the program, and it was in regards to the Bengals, essentially, and how they we don't get too nerdy on contracts here, but I did want to dive into the way that they structured their contracts and the victory lap that their social media team took. And then we got to just talk for a split second about RIP George Foreman and the influence he had on people of my generation with, I would say, one of the greatest inventions in the history of America, the George Foreman grill. But before we dive in to Jameis Winston, I do need to tell you about my friends, my partners, and the official ticketing app of this podcast, Game Time. What do you want to do? Do you want to go to opening day? Do you want to go to the Sweet 16? Do you want to go to a concert this summer? Do you want to do something fun? That's the key. Because sometimes in life, the monotony, the hamster wheel that we all find ourselves on, we need to mix it up. And that is where Game Time comes in, because you can do anything. Get your wife, get your brother, get your best friend, buy several tickets for your children, and go enjoy a night out on the town. Whether that's a basketball game, whether that's a concert, a comedy show. Just talking to my buddy Mark, he's like, I love going to comedy shows here in Arizona. Like, I got to check that out. I haven't been to a comedy show in a long time. And I would say this is the best ticketing app I've ever used by a country mile, and I've used every single major ticketing app that the internet has ever produced. So highly recommend it. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code JOHN for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code JOHN, John, for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Before we dive into those Bengals, Houday, I did want to talk about the signing of Jameis Winston to the Giants and what I think that signals. And I think part of I would say, the setup of the NFL, in basketball, the draft comes before free agency. Now, because free agency is so much more powerful with their names, the draft usually doesn't impact you. In football, it has a big impact. Now, every once in a while, you see a team sign Kirk Cousins and give him $100 million and then draft a quarterback with the 8th pick, and everyone is shell-shocked. But for the most part, you can kind of, put the pieces of the puzzle together. And there are some major question marks with some teams. What are you going to do at quarterback? And on Friday, it was reported Aaron Rodgers was in Pittsburgh, spent all day, which I would imagine with guys like Mike Tomlin, Arthur Smith, and other Pittsburgh Steeler brass. I think it's pretty clear that if Aaron Rodgers, he has two options. He is going to retire or he's going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler. Now, of the pie chart, I would say that feels like 80% Pittsburgh Steeler, 20% retirement, and maybe even just 18% retirement, and then holding out hope. Some in OTAs, they freak out about J.J. McCarthy and give Aaron Rodgers a call. I still think that's pretty unlikely at this point. Well, if Aaron Rodgers doesn't go to the Giants, what are the Giants going to do? And over the weekend, the betting favorite for the number 2 overall pick, it's pretty clear. The Tennessee Titans are taking Cam Ward. Like, that's period, point blank, end of story. They are taking that quarterback. And you could look at the free agent moves that they did not make to go, yeah, that's going to happen. Then you look at number two, you're like, well, the Browns, the Deshaun Watson situation is a disaster. He's got a torn Achilles. They got Kenny Pickett somehow now on their team. What are they? Myles Garrett goes, I feel comfortable with what we're going to do. No, Myles, they gave you $140 million guaranteed, and you took it. Don't blame you, but it doesn't matter who's playing quarterback when they threw that type of money at you because you had just demanded a trade. I do think it's my educated guess will Kirk Cousins will end up being on the Cleveland Browns. But based on the betting odds, Abdul Carter looks like he's going to be the number 2 overall pick. So the Giants are sitting there at number 3. And now they signed Jameis Winston. Pretty clear Aaron Rodgers is not coming their way. And I think when you look at John Mara last year in that GM offseason hard knocks, like he's no dummy. He knows from a business standpoint, it's not good to lose your best players. It's why he was adamant, like, listen, Saquon's our most popular player by far. And I've been in this operation long enough to know that kind of fucking matters. We've had some pretty popular players over the years while we've won and while we've lost, and they help drive this business. Because you know what no one likes? When the team sucks and you don't have any popular players. And you look at Shedeur Sanders, like, one, they're desperate. Their quarterback situation since Eli left has not been good. And two, like, it would be good for business. And if I'm the owner, I'm like, hey guys, we're taking Shedeur Sanders if he's there at 3. And based on the gambling odds, and I feel pretty confident that he's going to be there. And I saw Albert Breer say this. You know, the most unique thing about Shedeur Sanders is like he'd go 3rd or 4th overall, or he could just plummet in the draft. I think when the dust settles, he'll end up being the 3rd overall pick and be a New York Giant. And I think Jameis Winston, who has done one of the great turnarounds in the history of American sports, is just like the guy you kind of want in your locker room. He's positive, uplifting, just solid backup quarterback. Now, if you have to start him every game, you're going to have problems. A lot of jokes on the internet that look for Malik Neighbors to have like 7,000 yards. But I think the best part of signing a guy like Jameis Winston, if you're the Giants and you draft Shedeur Sanders number 3 overall, you literally can do anything you want. You can start Jameis Winston week 1 and just kind of let it play out. You can just say there's an open competition. You can immediately name Shedeur Sanders the starting quarterback in training camp. Nothing matters in terms of his standing of anything being weird. So I also think this, you know where I stand on skill guys, really high in the draft relative to linemen. But because this draft does not have any sure things, beside most people think Abdul Carter is just at worst going to be a solid pass rusher, there are a ton of question marks with the offensive linemen in this draft. It's pretty clear if you watch football, the New England Patriots are desperate for some tackles. But you look around this draft and you go, I don't see many Lane Johnsons and Trent Williams. So I think you would have to take Travis Hunter at 4. So where I sit here on Sunday afternoon, if I was a betting man on the draft, I would go Cam Ward 1. I would go Abdul Carter 2. I would go Shedeur Sanders 3 and Travis Hunter being 4. Let's dive into the Cincinnati Bengals because I saw this tweet from my buddy Jake Rosenberg, who used to be Howie Roseman's right-hand contract negotiator for well over a decade. At the end of my time there, he came in, and up until last draft, so a little under a year ago, he worked with Howie Roseman. And he had worked in finance before, and then he got into contract negotiation, and he was running point on all this stuff for a decade plus. And he had a tweet yesterday that, let me pull it up right now, that got my brain moving. So we started texting. Here was the tweet. Reducing current cap numbers through extensive use of proration. Let me say that again. Proration, to prorate the numbers, provides a team free options with literally no downside. To purposely decide to not prorate is indefensible. Help me understand the other side to this if I'm missing something. He's essentially saying when you sign a big contract and you take the signing bonus, the guaranteed money, it makes no sense to not take that 50 million, 80 million, 100 plus million, obviously with the quarterbacks, and prorate it over the life of the deal. So early on in those contracts, The cap number, like a Justin Jefferson or CeeDee Lamb last year, is actually much smaller than it would have been if they just would have played on their fifth year option. That's the benefit you have of signing these massive contracts is you can push it all down. The 49ers and Eagles and Browns and these teams paying massive cash for these contracts over the last couple of years have made a living on doing that because it enables you to have high priced players but still have wiggle room to compete and sign other guys. But the Cincinnati Bengals, because I didn't quite know what he meant, so we started texting about it. He said, well, look at Jamar Chase and T. Higgins contracts. Their cap number in the first year is not very low. And I don't pretend to be some capologist, so I had to do some digging. I went to guys like Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb, who signed enormous contracts, a lot like Jamar Chase last season. Here were their cap numbers, not their actual contracts, but the way it impacts the cap to enable you to pick up 5%, 10%, whatever, more space to do more business with other people. And you never know. It doesn't mean you have to sign someone right now, but something happens in the season, maybe a trade plays itself out, maybe over the course of the next year because you can roll over cap space, you can make an aggressive deal. Because the Cincinnati Bengals, when they signed two players and took this victory lap on social media like it's some novel concept to pay one of the best players in the league and another guy who's obviously really good is some crowning achievement. The more and more that I thought about it was kind of fucking embarrassing. This is not money that you've had to like put in hard work to generate. You're part of a partnership that generates billions of dollars. And whether you know what you're doing or not in the business of the NFL, if you own the team, you get a free $450 million every year. And I don't know the last time you checked, but the salary cap has never sniffed the amount of money that they're getting from these television partners. And that doesn't even factor in anything game day, tickets, all that other stuff, which the Bengals aren't going to be the highest team in the league, but that's just free money. And the other thing is that when you factor in the Bengals who always push back, we're cheap, that's bullshit, we paid Joe Burrow. Again, this is money, whether you win one game or 15 games every year is coming to you no matter what. And because of the partnership agreement that you're in with the players, you have to split, I forget the exact number, 49, 50, 51%, has to go to them. So like you are in a partnership not only with the other teams in the league, but then with the Players Association. So like money comes in, then you got to give half of it away, right? Now, you can control how much of that cash is given to certain players. It's why the crazy part about the business of the NFL is like the money has to be paid out, yet as a player and your agent, you have to fight for those dollars. But I think with the Cincinnati Bengals, you go, well, listen, you give them all this money, you're in this win now mode, you can get their cap numbers really small, you can extend Trey Hendrickson, hell, you could trade your first round pick for some sweet player, right? You could be really aggressive. But last year, Justin Jefferson, so I did some digging. I did a little, typed in some names, ChatGPT, contracts, Spot Track, and I looked at Justin Jefferson. Last year signed the biggest deal ever. His cap number in 2024 was $8.6 million. His cap number in this upcoming season is $15 million. CeeDee Lamb, basically the exact same. $8.7 million last year, and this year $15.3 million. Now, look at the Minnesota Vikings, for example. They had all that cap space, even though they're paying this guy all that money, they roll it over this year, and they're super aggressive, and they start buying players. Then I look at Jamar Chase's number. So those guys, in their first year of their big contract, $8 million, 8.6 and 8.7. Jamar Chase is 23.5. And in their second year, both those guys are 15 million. Jamar Chase is $26 million. So instead of prorating it out, they've had bigger cap numbers. Why? Because the faster you get to that 100%, you can be like, we don't have any more cash to spend. We don't have any more cap space to sign any players. Because ultimately the cap space, it's less about that and more about Mike Brown just giving out more signing bonuses to people. Again, it's why it's so embarrassing about that victory lap that they took on social media. It's like, yeah, guys, you signed one of the best players you've ever drafted in Jamar Chase, and you gave him a lot of money, but then you didn't manipulate the cap like every fucking team worth their salt because you try to like have your cake and eat it too. Like, hey, we want credit, but we're not going to sign anyone else. And then T. Higgins. T. Higgins' cap number in 2025, this upcoming season, is actually bigger than Jamar Chase. Now, T. Higgins didn't sign a contract like Chase, like Jefferson, or CeeDee Lamb. You could compare his contract much more like Brandon Ayuk. Well, last year, Brandon Ayuk, who was going to have to play on his fifth-year option, the moment they extended him, his cap number last year was $5.7 million. And Brandon Ayuk, who's driving the Niners nuts because they think he got over on them and they would trade him, but they can't get any value back, his cap number in 2025 is $11 million. So Higgins, while his cap number does go down in this next season, it's still almost $20 million. So what they have done is they did pay these two guys, but they've also kept their cap numbers high. So it's like, okay, Joe, like, yeah, you got enough juice, you can boss us around, and we'll take care of your two guys. But we're not going like Eagles, Niners, Vikings. We're just going to give out all this cash to all these other players. Because at the end of the day, we are cheap. It's in our blood. I've said this forever. Super rich people that are really frugal, and I got no problem if it's the patriarch, Sam Walton. I just listened to Made in America. It's like the story of Walmart, notoriously cheap, right? But like that's his baby. He started it from scratch. He can still relate to the times when they had no money. Like, I'm sorry, Mike Brown. This is a family fucking business. You didn't buy this team. And now you guys have more money than you know what to do with. So still doing stuff like this, you're an unserious franchise. You really are. You're an unserious franchise that drafts pretty well. Obviously, Burrow fell in your lap, nailed that one. Jamar Chase, you get credit on that one because you could have taken Penei Sewell, good pick. T. Higgins, excellent second round pick. But you want to have like milk and cookies because you gave out some money that gets handed you through the league partners. Like, I'm sorry, not doing that. And when you factor in the numbers, like you don't need to be Howie Roseman here to go, they're kind of manipulating the books here. Not in a way to take advantage of the situation. Like the Eagles have done forever. Why? Because their owner's willing to give out big cash, which the Niners have done the last couple of years, which they went 6-11. Their owner freaked out. The Bengals ain't doing that. And they'll never do that. Why? Because as long as the Brown family owns the team, they will do stuff like this. Honestly, kind of embarrassing. Props to those two guys for getting what they deserve. But, and listen, the other thing with Higgins is like, I like the guy, but like you want all this credit. I think a lot of people would go, is this the right business move? Or you're kind of getting, bitched around by Joe Burrow, which I totally understand. You don't want to piss him off, but then you do it, and then you do it in a way where your team, the best case scenario over the next couple of years, can't be as good as they should because you just refuse, I don't know, to prorate the contracts. Man, it's a disease, man. Frugality with the super rich who did not earn the money it's just deep in their soul. Nothing you can do to fix that disease. When it comes to college basketball and March Mania, one thing is for sure. Nothing's for sure. Upsets, buzzer beaters, Cinderellas, top seeds going home early. It's all gonna happen. Bet the unexpected. Every upset, every day with DraftKings Sportsbook. With live betting, exclusive content, promos, and parlays, DraftKings is the ultimate college basketball destination for March. Ready to make your first bet? Check out matchups and pick a team to win. It's that simple. First time, here's something special just for you. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Bet the unexpected with DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Use the code JOHN, that's J-O-H-N. That's code JOHN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Okay, let's end on this. George Foreman passed away. And I think there are certain people with every generation that not for what actually made them famous. Right? Like John Madden. I don't remember when I learned that he was actually a coach, but it was well after I knew John Madden as being the guy with the video game and that called, 49er games and Packer games and Cowboy games. That was a superstar on Fox. Then you're like, as you get older, honestly, it might have been a decade. It might have been until I was after high school that you're like, well, this guy used to coach for the Raiders. Right? This guy was a legendary Raider coach in the 70s. But when you're coming up in the 90s, all you know is like, this is one of the most unique individuals ever on my television and my favorite video game. And I think George Foreman, for people in my generation, is known as the guy with the grill, not as the guy that was part of what many would consider, I don't know where you would rank it, but probably the most famous fight of all time. Definitely one of the biggest fights in the history of the sport, the Rumble in the Jungle against Muhammad Ali. And George Foreman then parlayed that to become one of the great businessmen, I would say definitely in the 90s, but you could argue in the history of former athletes. And I just want to read you that really quick. I've always still had this theory because I'm a good example of I make my money with the modern day technology internet. Because of the cell phone, I'm able to monetize my profession. If that 20 years ago, this didn't even exist. I couldn't have and make a living off what I do now. It would have been in radio, and I would have had to move city to city or figure out a way, right? But because of technology, which I'm very grateful for, and it has its downfalls, social media, you name it. But without social media, the phone, and those things, I would not be sitting here today being able to do this. I've always thought that, and listen, I think the internet and everything that's going on, like I try to be a glass half full guy and be positive with everything that's associated with and be optimistic about its future, even though it can drive us all nuts. If you are famous now because of the internet, doesn't mean you're not famous. You can have millions of people follow you on social media and you can make a ton of money, quote unquote, being an influencer. But you could be a person making millions of dollars that me, that you have no clue even exists. I do think that was really hard to do pre-internet. And the fame of people pre-internet was just dramatically bigger than what it is now. Because if you were famous in the 50s or the 60s, Elvis Presley, John Wayne, Frank Sinatra, everyone knew who you were. When I was a kid, people like Michael Jackson, Michael Jordan, whoever, right? Obviously athletes, but musicians, the Kennedys, you name it. You could go into any walk of life. I could knock on every single door walking down the street. And every person that opened their door on my block, on the block down the street, would know exactly who Michael Jackson was, or Robert F. Kennedy was, or Elvis Presley was. Now there are people you'd be like, hey, this person's making $20 million. They're a Bravo star. You and me couldn't point them out of a lineup. And honestly, some of these I could now because Maria's wrote me in, but there are these people in all these different walks of life because of the internet that has changed the world. And George Foreman's fame in the 90s is something that we don't really see anymore. And sometimes I miss it. It's like we hear about shows, and there are some shows that I would say cross over, but like for the most part in the 80s or the 90s, everyone watched the same shows and we all had opinions on the same thing that we were all watching. It's what makes football so unique. It's the only thing in America now that can consistently get 15, 20, 30 million people all sitting down at the same time and consuming. That doesn't happen anymore, which is just part of modern day society. But I saw what's funny is, I don't know when it was, but maybe a week ago, I saw something on George Foreman on Instagram. And it was an interview series that he did with that Graham guy that has like the internet. He's also, I think, I forget what channel he's on, but he interviews a bunch of famous former athletes. And they were breaking down how much money George Foreman was making off the grill. And I was blown away. I knew the grill was a really big deal. And then over the last 24 hours, once he passed away, I kind of just did some deep diving. One stat I saw on the George Foreman grill is that it was estimated between 12 to 15% of America had the George Foreman grill. And this is just from Wikipedia, but it's pretty crazy how big George Foreman turned this grill into. And if you are, I would say 25 or under, it's hard for you to comprehend how universally agreed upon every person just had a George Foreman grill in their house. I don't remember many people that I grew up around not having it. And definitely as you got to college in the early to mid 2000s, it was a staple of every house. mainly because it just worked and it was really easy. I mean, it's actually one of the more practical inventions in recent memory. And then doing the deep dive, you realize that like all these other celebrities tried to copy it. Evander Holyfield had this thing like the lean mean grilling machine. Clearly that didn't work. Jackie Chan tried one. A bunch of famous people tried it. But nothing was like this. And the worldwide popularity of the George Foreman grill has resulted in sales, this is from Wiki, of over 100 million units since it first launched. I chat GPT'd it because I couldn't remember, and it's a long time ago, how much George Foreman grills were going for. And there were different models, but basically 49.99 to 89.99, selling over 100 million units. Although Foreman never confirmed exactly how much he earned from his endorsement, Sultan Inc. paid him 138 million dollars in 1999 in order to buy out the right to use his name. So in 1999, this invention started in the early, I think 93 or 94, and he had gotten royalties of it over those 6 or 7 years. And then in 1999, he was paid $138 million. I mean, it's a big deal now when Myles Garrett gets $130 million. $138 million in 1999. But here's the thing. Previous to that, he was being paid about 40% of the profits of each grill sold, earning him about $4.5 million a month at its peak. So there was a period of time, whether it was a year, a couple years, he was making 4 to 5. And he said on the Instagram thing, he's like, I was making $5 million a month. And then eventually bought out for $140 million. So it's estimated he made well over $200 million from his endorsement, a sum that is substantially more than he earned as a boxer. Obviously, he didn't earn that much as a boxer because in the 70s, they weren't paying big freights. But and George Foreman was a guy he lost to Ali, and he never got a rematch, which was kind of crazy. But beat Joe Frazier, who obviously had some legendary fights with Muhammad Ali as well. But I think when we talk about influencers, and that's just a trendy term because it's real. I mean, there are people that push a lot of product as just quote unquote influencers on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok. I mean, there's part of our show that there's an influencer element, but that's just the nature of the business in as a podcaster, which used to be radio of the audio medium. But just someone who doesn't have a podcast or a TV star or whatever, I'm just a human and I'm just pushing a product. You could argue George Foreman's one of the greatest salesmen in the history of America. And the business deal that, whether he decided it, whether his manager did it to originally get that 40% of the profits to then parlay that into the power of his name. But like this product not only worked, everyone had it. Honestly, 15% feels a little low. At least in my life, whether it be growing up or whether it being college. And the other thing that the grill had is it like crossed all demos. Like some items in life, right, are for either higher income households, lower income households, like whether you were rich, whether you were middle class, whether you were poor. Like this fucking thing was a must have. And RIP to a champion. Back, it was before my time, but heavyweight boxing, I mean, how badass, how famous these guys that were just massive throwing blows. It's just it's dead. But one of the greatest entrepreneurs in the history of professional athletes.